My message about what I'm offering you should not have to compete with the colors and the font and the size of things on the page. It should be free and clear. It should be the only thing you have to think about is my offer.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. This is the podcast where we cover growing and monetizing a fan base and building a music career with marketing strategies that are working right now based on what we see every single day inside our music marketing agency and across our community of thousands of artists and bands. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. This is episode 387. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy, and with me as always is Circa. Cirque, what's going on, dude?
Just doing some coding, dude. Loving life. We're out here.
In the coding den. Well, I'm excited to be here with you today, my friend.
Likewise.
Today, we're going to be talking about what they don't tell artists about branding. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And so we wanted to share some thoughts and some ideas and some practical advice for you today about your artist brand and where it connects in your marketing.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot to talk about.
There's a ton to talk about because people in music love to talk about artists and branding. They love to talk to artists about building a visual identity as a way to give fans, potential fans especially, things to associate you with. It makes you stand out. A brand gives you your identity as an artist. And everyone loves to talk about branding. And all of that stuff is true. But here's what they don't tell you about when it comes to branding, especially if you're early on in your music career and you're just starting to build up and you're just starting to market, or if you're really starting to make big moves online to take fans deeper into your world and creating fans that are continuing to hang around with you, if you're trying to build your list of fans, if you're trying to sell online, sell merch online, launch online, the thing that they won't tell you is that everything from your visuals to your art, to your story, to the way you talk, to your promo graphics, all of those things need to work together to trigger recognition and actually drive a boost in engagement with your fans every step of the way. And that's what people don't talk about when it comes to branding. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Hell yeah. Probably actually never talked about this aspect. Well, we kind of have, but always as a component of exploring a larger concept. So it's cool to double click on this and kind of, if you're listening to this, if you're an indie, it should clarify for you like definite misconceptions you have about the importance of branding and what it does.
For sure. Yeah. We did an episode, I think it was episode 305, where we talked about like the concept of branding and the overall idea of what it means to actually build an artist brand and kind of clear away some of those, I'll say like 30,000 foot view misconceptions of what it means to really build a brand and clear away some of the more like nebulous language around branding. So if you haven't heard that episode, we'll link to it in the show notes. But today, kind of wanted to get a little bit more tactical about what this actually does for you. And maybe this is useful to just introduce a concept that we haven't talked about on the show, or like you said, haven't talked about in depth, which is the concept of ad scent, which is really just your messaging and your visuals go from step to step when you're taking fans from clicking on a post, for example, to going to a page on your website or going to your store. That's really what we want to unpack here today and how all of that is impacted by your brand.
Yeah, 100%. I think to split the sort of focus here for a second, oftentimes we've encountered that artists are prematurely interested in branding themselves, where there is a point in your career where it's valid to pay a lot of attention to brand and to try to be intentional about that.
For sure.
In our minds, it's actually kind of impossible to do that if you're sufficiently early in your career, because brand is emergent of a community you build. So as you build a community, the brand usually comes from the bottom up. It's not something you dictate to your community. It's elements of your character and the things you do that they pull out as significant.
Yeah.
That then get echoed back to them. So you cannot know in advance what people are going to gravitate towards within like the whole library of aspects of your character, the things you say, parts of your song and lyrics and different design patterns and things like that. Visually, semantically, you cannot account for these things up front. So before you have a large fan base that's giving you that feedback, it's almost something that is just a complete waste of time. Now, for the purpose of looking professional, there is some much smaller degree of branding that is necessary than you probably think. And it's also probably manifests in ways that you've never articulated. So we often hear artists worry a lot about branding, but then they cannot talk about it in the way a brand designer would. And they really don't know what they mean, I think, when they say branding. But there's visual aspects to your branding. There are semantic and psychological aspects to your branding. And your branding has a lot more to do with your mission and what you're trying to accomplish than I think a lot of artists know or, would intuit. But that said, one very important part about visual branding on the web for web experiences is an orientating mechanism. And what it does is it tells people where they are and what to expect. And a good example of this is that there's not a McDonald's in the world. How many locations are there for McDonald's? How many McDonald's locations? There's 41,000 of them. Out of 41,000 stores, there's not a store you can walk into where you do not know you're at McDonald's. You always know you're at McDonald's. You always know. 41,000 stores, all different owners for the most part, and you always know you're at McDonald's. Even if you're not at the store, but you're eating McDonald's, you always know you're eating it. That is an effect that is provided for by branding cues. You know not only that you're at or eating McDonald's because of branding, but you know what to expect out of your visit and your meal because of those visual cues. And what they're doing there is they're orienting you to the experience, okay? Every part of that experience caches back to McDonald's. The McDonald's concept space in your head gets reinforced and all of the negatives and the positives get attached to it. Before that, if I go have, 100 meals at 100 different McDonald's restaurants and there's no visual branding, all of those experiences do not accumulate on a single object in my neurochemical patterns, okay? My electrochemical neural patterns. They don't all encode together because I'm having a slightly different experience that is attributable to slightly different entities and values. So I can't organize it appropriately. But what branding does is it organizes all of it. It gives you a single object in your conceptual space to attach all of your experiences, expectations, hopes, dreams, everything to. And so visual branding does have that benefit, and that actually manifests downstream as various different effects that we talk about in isolation, but they're really part of this core pattern of visual branding orients you to where you are and what you should be expecting. And it has to do with your company.
And all of that leads back to something you mentioned, Cirque, about artists often desiring to start deep branding, what I'll call deep branding, earlier on in their careers than they actually can sufficiently do, because the best branding happens as a result of really careful listening to what an audience and a customer base is picking up on.
Yeah.
The signals that you're subconsciously feeding them as an artist, and then the things that they're picking up on, you listen, you do more, you double down on those things, and you give it back, and that builds your brand over time. Now, what you were talking about as far as visual branding, the McDonald's example is such a good one, because those are things that you can pick up on very early in your career as an artist, very early on as you're building a fan base, and you can use tactically visual branding to drive better engagement on social media, online, in whatever you're doing to try and market yourself. And here's what I mean by that. There's a very common phrase in digital marketing or marketing in general: a confused mind doesn't buy, right? Or a confused mind doesn't click in this case. So imagine how disoriented you would be if you saw a TV ad for McDonald's, right? And you were like, man, I could really go for a Big Mac today. And you drive up to the Golden Arches and you park your car and you open the door and you walk in. And the first thing you see, the only thing you see on the menu is like a bunch of tacos. And suddenly you feel like you're in a Taco Bell, right? Mismatch of branding. The messaging that you saw on the ad that you watched on TV, the Golden Arches that you rolled up on in the parking lot, you shut the door to your car, you walk in the door, you feel like you're going into a McDonald's, and all of a sudden you feel like you're in a completely different restaurant. Very disorienting, right? This is what happens with a lot of artists online when it comes to branding. A fan sees a post of yours, maybe a video that you're running online as an ad, or you're just posting organically on social media, and then you take them somewhere and it looks nothing like, or has no cues to where they just left from. What kind of dissonance does that create in a fan? Same deal if someone sees a video of yours online, maybe you're going viral, and then they land on your Instagram profile and it's a ghost town and there's nothing posted. They're going to be like, oh man, I thought this artist was popping off, but it looks like there's really nothing going on. Like the lights are on, but nobody's home kind of thing. These are branding elements. You can see how your activity also falls under the category of branding. If you want to appear to be an artist that has something going on, you actually have to act with things that are going on and be active online. That falls into branding. So much of it falls under this umbrella. Same deal with like running, I don't know, like a giveaway, for example. Imagine you're running a giveaway for tickets to an upcoming show on your tour. You're saying, hey, in Philadelphia, I'm giving away, 10 tickets to fans. And in your post, you say, just click below to sign up and possibly win tickets. And they click and they get to a page that encourages them to buy tickets. That's going to confuse somebody. That's a branding mismatch on the messaging. So you can see here how Cirque's example of McDonald's played out in the opposite direction online is something that a lot of artists struggle with. And it comes down to very big details about like your visual identity, your colors, what people see, the logo. And then it comes down to other things a little bit deeper on in terms of like your messaging and your copy and the places that you're leading them to. All of that has an impact.
Yeah, you can think about this from first principles. I mean, I guess it's not first principles because there's some axioms baked in here, but the point being is that like we all know that we don't have infinite energy, right? As organisms, we're not unbounded energy wise. We have a finite amount of energy, and our brain consumes energy in order to process, to compute. We cannot actually process everything. So therefore, we have to have an opinion about what should be thought about. What should we pay attention to? That's why attention is a scarce resource, is because we just don't have that much energy. And so the brain is actually trying to reduce the amount of energy it has to spend at all times. And one of the first things to go is that which is familiar. This can be to your disadvantage in that you can be not calling attention to yourself because you're not standing out. But it can also be to your advantage in that you are not causing friction by getting people to think about things that are different now. Okay. So if I see your ad, you do want to stand out because I'm scrolling. You want to stand out from the scroll. Once I click on your ad, you don't want to stand out. You don't want to make me have to compute more. You want it to just slip right in. The only new information I should have to think about should be actual necessary components of me taking the next action. Everything else should be minimized. Evolutionarily, we evolved to notice the rustling in the bushes because it could be a tiger, but we don't care about the campfire we slept by last night. We're already familiar with it. And so we want to create a bed of what is familiar about the entire user experience once we've captured attention. And that's what branding, visual branding online really does, is it just smooths everything out. From the moment I see your ad and I am compelled by it, I am put in a familiar environment. And as long as that environment doesn't change, you are not forcing me to consume calories. You're not forcing me to think more than I otherwise need to. And therefore I am comfortable. I can move forward smoothly. There is no stops and starts and stutters. I can just what marketers actually unfortunately have called a greased chute. I have a greased chute all the way to the end of the user experience, the user flow. Okay. You basically a slip and slide that's been, wiped down with butter, right? Like I'm just going to smoothly glide to the end insofar as there's not any huge visual bugs, new branding elements to like at least momentarily notice. I'm just going to go smoothly to the end. That's why I'm often bewildered by some of the more abhorrent landing page designs I see. Because it's like hot pink is in there. There's like 8 different primary colors on the page and all these like hard lines with like square boxes that are unnecessary and just poorly organized information. And it's like, man, as soon as I get on this landing page, I'm going to have to spend the next 5 minutes just reorienting myself to what the hell is going on.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a huge problem. So that's what visual branding does for you is once you capture attention, you want the opposite of standing out. You don't want to stand out. The only thing that should stand out is like, I told you to come to a landing page to get something for free. Well, if I then want to offer you a paid product on the other end, I necessarily need to introduce new information that you necessarily have to think about and pay attention to. But I should have no competition there. My message about what I'm offering you should not have to compete with the colors and the font and the size of things on the page. It should be free and clear. It should be the only thing you have to think about is my offer. You do not have to think about all these other things. That's what visual branding can help you with, is because it at least gives you a thing to implement that you don't have to think about. Hey, these are my primary colors. This is my font. This is my font size for headlines, for body text. These are graphic design elements that are always on my pages. This is what my header always looks like. These types of things negotiated beforehand will help you in designing pages that are compelling, that don't raise suspicions, raise friction.
Dude, I'm so glad you pointed out those few examples of like the branding elements that you should seek to make consistent, because that makes landing page design, for example, so much easier. Just those few things, like negotiate those ahead of time and you're golden. I think, imagine these sort of two modalities. I think artists fall into this trap. Like, they get into building a landing page and it's like a kid in a candy store just like stuffing their face with everything they can possibly find. Like, there's so much that you can do that it's like, oh, I'm going to make this color, and oh, I'm going to add images here. Oh, hold on, I'm going to put a slider in here with a bunch of different images. Oh, why don't I add a video too? Compare that to the simplicity that is required to just keep someone who's clicking on a post going to the next step with you. Really, like, I've seen this play out so many times. I remember years ago, I was running a giveaway for an artist. They were giving away a guitar, and like a signed acoustic guitar signed by a bunch of other artists and themselves. And the difference between the landing page having a higher conversion rate versus a lower conversion rate in like testing that I was doing was quite literally just making the image on the landing page the same as the image that was in the ad creative, as opposed to a slightly different image. Literally, we just made them exactly the same, and that uniformity between the two visual creatives made things just click for people. Crazy how simple it was.
Yeah, it's one less thing to think about. Another thing is that, like, it's long been known since before Jack and I were even thinking about marketing, that ugly converts better.
Oh yeah, dude. Love an ugly landing page.
Yeah, so like for time immemorial, much to the chagrin of like people who care a lot about design, you're often better off with a plain text email than you are with an HTML email. You're often better off with a plain text landing page that looks more like a newspaper article than a website you've been to. It's probably going to convert better. Why? Because it's actually really hard to implement design elements that aren't jarring and difficult to deal with cognitively. Some cognitive friction is almost always introduced by design. And really, this is why designers are highly paid and highly educated, because that last mile of design, fortitude, it takes everything. It takes everything. Like, anyone can learn how to make pretty looking pages, but it takes everything to learn how to make pretty looking pages that feel and operate smoothly with no friction. Oftentimes people go way too complex in their design, And that just gives the complexity onto the user. And the point I'm raising here is that oftentimes you're shooting yourself in the foot by trying to be fancy. And the reason is that it's just a whole lot more for people to have to think about. It's a whole lot more error surface, meaning if I put a plain text landing page that has no design elements whatsoever and everything is the browser defaults, it doesn't matter what device you load it on or what part of the world you're in. It's going to load really fast and it's going to look pretty much the same as anyone else's experience. And so you have a consistency of experience across all users. And even if it's subpar, on average, it's better than a completely fragmented experience across devices and use cases. So, when you introduce a little bit more complexity, you quadratically increase, like exponentially increase the amount of implementation expertise and attention you have to pay. Any idiot can make a plain text landing page and have it look pretty much the same on every single device. That's actually very simple, especially with modern browsers. They do it all for you. It takes like a wild expert to implement a high design landing page in such a way that's consistent and fast loading and all that across different experiences. And so I just say all that to say that you're often better off keeping it simple before you have a whole lot of branding. And simple just means, do you have a color palette that's implemented? Do you have brand fonts that are implemented and a size scale for those fonts? Here's my title font, otherwise known as H1. It's our brand font, but it's just black or bold. These are different types of font weights. And it is always 96px. Here's my H2. It's always bold, same font, and it's always 56px. Here's my body font. It's always this and that. So having those things negotiated up front means you'll be able to implement a consistent design that even if it's not fancy, it's going to feel familiar. It's going to feel like yours. And I'm not going to feel different when I have to go and navigate that as a user.
100%. And to take this a step further, all of those things are great to audit, I would say, if you're thinking about like branding, right? And how it applies to your marketing and the fan journey, whatever the fan journey might be for you right now, whatever you're working on in your marketing, those are great elements to pay attention to. Another element that I would just dive a bit deeper into is pay close attention to the way that you speak across pages. Look at your posts and the copy that you write. Look at your profile and the descriptions that you write in your bio. Look at your landing pages and look at the calls to action in those. Can you unify the way that you speak to fans and encourage them to take the next step? For example, I mentioned like if you're running a giveaway or asking fans to sign up for your email list or your text list or something, and in the post or on your IG profile in your bio or on your Facebook or whatever, like if you're saying sign up as the call to action and then they get to a landing page and it does not say sign up, but it says something like click here to buy, they're going to get, or click here to, get your copy of the record or something. And there's not consistency in your messaging that is very clear. Those are the kinds of things that you also want to audit. Audit your calls to action, audit your copy, so that you can unify those things across the board. And you can make them exciting still. I'm not saying like neuter your calls to action, but I'm saying make them consistent so that fans don't get confused about what you're asking them to do.
Yeah, 100%. I think also like one thing you should consider is that it's not just your ads, right? The place that your early fans will pick up on what you're supposed to look and sound and feel like before they actually start interacting with you on like off of common web properties is in your content. In your videos online on social media, you will implement some branding pattern. It might not be intentional. It might just be that you like this one default font type when you're adding like captions in TikTok, right? But that's now what people come to expect from you. And some degree of intention when it comes time to either one, define how your visual style extends to you online, you in email, you on your website, you on your online store, your merch designs, your album covers, trying to one, infer what that should be based on what you've already done that's been successful on social, or even better, start to bring some of that forward in time. When you start doing content, think about what your brand looks like, what you want to convey visually, and implement some degree of that in your content. Because I'll tell you what, if I watch a Misfits music video and then I go and look at Misfits typography and branding, even if there's no typography and graphic elements in the video, I still know they're from the same thing. Like, it's obvious, right? Because thematically, they are from the same source point, right? This 1950s B horror movie punk rock, it is where their visual style for video content comes from. It's also where their visual style from their branding comes from. They come from the same place. And because that was clear at the outset, there will be no mistakes made. And certainly, like, if I slap the graphic design elements, their logo, their typography, their color palette onto a video that doesn't have it, it's not going to feel out of place. And if I put video content from their, music videos of the past on their website, it's certainly not going to feel out of place, even if there's none of one on the other, if that makes sense. Having a good idea about what that is, what is the theme, the thematic space from which your brand is likely going to derive, you can save yourself a lot of headache. You don't have to know what your font is up front for web, because the theme of what you're putting out on social necessarily is going to match the theme of what you want to do for web later on. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, dude, that's really well said, especially because social is where, especially if you're early on in building an audience, social is where you probably spend a lot of your time marketing and trying to engage with fans. So it only makes sense that the downstream steps of that, or the, lower steps in the funnel, are going to take cues from that, most likely.
Yeah. And it's like, I wouldn't even necessarily recommend that you put custom fonts in your TikTok videos and your Instagram reels. Like, that might actually be a bad idea. It might be better to use the stock fonts that are available to you. I can't say that for certain, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility based on like the trend we've seen with regards to native media. So I'm not saying like, hey, have your web font you're going to use and your print font you're going to use up front because you're going to want to use it for all your captions on your videos. Like, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying, understand the thematic space from which you're going to filter. You're going to look through fonts and see, does it fit this theme, this underlying theme? Does it fit my semantic brand? If you know what that is, at least a shape of it beforehand, you can at least have that space and that intention when you go to design things like, what costumes are we going to wear? What's our set going to be? What kinds of like color correction or some kind of color look? What kinds of lighting? These things all speak to that. And so having some idea of what that is up front, I'm not saying, oh, you have to know exactly what having like a theme of like sort of like hippies, like peace and love movement brought to like new age electronica, like that's your theme. And so you got to know how you color correct your videos and what sets you use in your social media content based on that. Like, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, if you know what that is, it will stop you from making things that are broadly disjointed from that theme. Okay. You're not going to do things that are wildly out of character. And so it's all going to be a lot more cohesive than if you didn't have it.
100%. I hope that you can see that making these branding decisions, these choices, all serve the kind of like MVP brand building exercise that we're talking about here, that really has one purpose, which is allowing fans to easily and smoothly go through stages of relationship with you, we could call it, or just being allowed to easily take a next step with you without being confused about what you're encouraging them to do, what they're wanting to do. That's really kind of the whole thesis of what we're talking about here. And I think that this is really important for artists to get through, because it kind of demystifies the concept of branding very, very early on, so that you don't get lost in this sort of like mystical soup of building a visual identity and such, and what reasons actually benefit from it.
Yeah, 100%.
Man, we really attacked branding. I love this. I hope that you guys take away some really easy action items here for things you can look at in what you're currently doing or things you could be doing differently as you continue forward in your career as an artist, as you try to connect marketing and branding together, because ultimately they serve one another very well when you approach it this way. I hope this helps clear up branding for you a little bit, gives you something, a new way to think about it, and we'll see you next time on Creative Juice. Peace out.
Can y'all really feel the East Coast?